The night my brother's name appeared on the deed to my grandmother's cottage, I was standing in the kitchen of that same cottage holding a cup of tea that had gone cold an hour ago. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just stood there reading the document over and over, the way you read something when your brain refuses to accept what your eyes are telling it. Let me back up. My grandmother passed in October 2 years ago. She left behind a small lakefront property in the Kawartha Lakes region, about 2 hours northeast of Toronto. Nothing fancy, a 3-bedroom cottage built in the 70s, a dock that needed replacing, and a wood stove that heated the whole main floor if you kept it fed. She'd owned it outright since 1989. No mortgage, no liens, just a clean title and 30 years of family summers. She left it to me. I know that sounds like something everyone says when there's a dispute over an estate, but I have the will. I have the version she signed with her lawyer in 2019, after she updated it specifically because she said, and I'm quoting from the document, she wanted to leave the property to the granddaughter who had shown consistent care and stewardship of the family home. That was me. I was the one who drove up every spring to open the cottage. I cleared the Evastros, called the plumber when the pipes froze, replaced the water pump in 2021 out of my own pocket. My brother hadn't been to the property in 4 years before she died. His name is not in that will, which is why it was such a shock when I found his name on a new deed. I should tell you a little about my family dynamic so this makes sense. My brother is the eldest. He's always been the one my parents considered the responsible one, the serious one, the one who handled things. I'm 5 years younger, and I've spent most of my adult life being treated like I'm still figuring myself out, even though I've owned my own condo in Hamilton since I was 28. Manage a team of 12 at work, and by every reasonable measure have my life more together than he does. He's been in and out of financial trouble for years. 2 failed business ventures. A second mortgage on his house in Mississauga that his wife doesn't know the full extent of. I know this because my mother told me in one of her moments of anxious oversharing, and then made me promise not to say anything. I kept that promise longer than I should have. After my grandmother died, the estate went through probate in Ontario. I was named executor as well as beneficiary for the cottage. My cousin received some of the furniture and personal effects. A charitable donation was specified. Everything was straightforward. The lawyer handling the estate, my grandmother's lawyer, not mine, walked me through the process. I signed what I needed to sign. By the spring of the following year, I had the title transferred into my name. Or so I thought. What I actually had was a title in my name, and then, sometime in the 4 months that followed, a second transfer I never authorized. I found out by accident. I was refinancing my condo in Hamilton, and my mortgage broker ran a routine check on my assets. She called me on a Tuesday afternoon and said, "I'm seeing something unusual. There's a property in your name in Kawartha Lakes, but there's also a subsequent transfer document on file. The title currently shows a joint tenancy between you and she paused, a Mr. Elliot Crane. Elliot is my brother. I asked her to send me everything she had. Then I sat down on my kitchen floor and read it. Someone had filed a transfer of title adding my brother as a joint tenant. The document used my name. It had a signature on it. The signature was not mine. I knew what I was looking at. I just needed a few minutes to let it fully land. I did not call my brother. I did not call my mother. I did not call my mother. I did not call anyone in my family. I called a real estate lawyer. Her name is, well, I'll just call her my lawyer because she's asked me not to use her name publicly while the matter is still ongoing. She's been practicing property law in Ontario for over 20 years. I found her through a colleague at work who had used her for a boundary dispute. When I explained what I'd found, she was quiet for a moment and then she said, "Do not touch anything. Do not reach out to your brother. Do not discuss this with your parents. Come to my office tomorrow morning and bring every document you have." I brought everything. The original will, the probate certificate, the first title transfer, my grandmother's death certificate, the records from the estate lawyer, every email I'd ever exchanged about the property, every receipt for work I'd done on it, the plumber, the pump, the materials I'd bought at the hardware store in Lindsay. I had a folder on my laptop going back to 2018 of every trip I'd made to the cottage with dates and photos. My lawyer looked at all of it and said, "You've documented this well." I told her I worked in compliance. "It's a reflex." She explained what had likely happened. The fraudulent transfer would have required someone to obtain a copy of my personal information, my full legal name, my date of birth, possibly my Ontario address, and fabricate a signature on a land transfer document. In Ontario, real property transfers go through the Land Registry Office, and while there are verification requirements, the system has vulnerabilities that have been exploited before. It's not common. But it happens. She filed a notice of dispute with the Land Registry Office that same week, which effectively froze any further transactions on the property. She also referred the matter to the Ontario Provincial Police's Financial Crimes Unit, because what had been done, forging a signature on a land transfer document, is criminal fraud under the Criminal Code of Canada. I want to be honest about what those weeks felt like. I wasn't angry yet. That came later. In the beginning, I was mostly just stunned. There's something particularly disorienting about discovering that someone has used your own name to take something from you. It's not like a robbery where something is taken from your hands. It's like finding out the ground you were standing on wasn't solid to begin with. I also, somewhere in the back of my head, kept thinking, maybe there's an explanation. Maybe this is a mistake. Maybe there's something I'm not understanding about how the process worked. My lawyer disabused me of that pretty efficiently. There's no administrative explanation for this, she said. Someone deliberately filed a document with a forged signature. That's not a clerical error. About 6 weeks after I'd first discovered the transfer, my mother called me. This was unusual. We spoke, but not often, and she typically texted. She said she wanted to talk about the cottage. She said she'd been thinking about it and she felt it wasn't fair that I had sole ownership when the cottage had always been a family property. She said my brother had some financial pressures right now and that having a share in the cottage would help him with his situation. I listened to her say all of this. I asked very carefully whether she had spoken to anyone about the legal ownership of the cottage recently. She said she and my brother had had a few conversations. I asked if she knew that the title had been altered without my consent. There was a pause. Then she said she didn't know anything about that. She just thought it would be a nice thing to do for the family, and why was I always so focused on what was legally mine? I told her I had to go. I hung up. Then I called my lawyer and told her about the conversation. She told me to write down everything my mother had said, word for word, as close to verbatim as I could manage, with the time and date of the call. I did it that night. What I hadn't told anyone yet, not my lawyer, not my friends, not my mother, was that I had already taken steps to protect myself that had nothing to do with the legal process. After I discovered the transfer, and before I'd even called my lawyer, I'd driven up to the cottage. It was a Thursday evening in March. Still cold, the lake still frozen at the edges. I let myself in with my key. I walked through every room. Everything looked normal. But I noticed that the lockbox we kept on the back door, the one that had held a spare key since my grandmother's time, had a fresh scratch on the shackle. Someone had been at it recently. I changed all the locks that weekend. Front door, back door, the storage shed. New deadbolts, new keys, no copies made except for the one I kept. I also installed 4 exterior cameras, 2 interior cameras pointed at the main entry points, and a smart home hub that gave me remote access to everything from my phone. The system was on my personal account. It required my biometric authentication to access the live feed. No one else could get in. I did not tell my family I had done any of this. March passed, April came. The legal process moved at the pace legal processes move, which is to say, slowly, with a lot of waiting and the occasional flurry of paperwork. The OPP interviewed me. They interviewed my lawyer. At some point, I understood they would interview my brother, though my lawyer advised me not to ask about the timeline of that. In early May, I got an alert on my phone at 11:30 on a Friday night. Motion detected. Back door. I opened the app. The camera was showing my brother's face clearly in the back door light, looking at the new deadbolt. He had something in his hand. I couldn't tell what it was at that angle, but he spent about 4 minutes trying to get the door open before he gave up and walked around to the front. I called the OPP non-emergency line and reported that someone was attempting to access my property without authorization. I gave them the address. I told them I had camera footage. The officer I spoke to noted the call and said they would send someone to do a drive-by. My brother left before anyone arrived. The cameras captured his face, his vehicle, and his license plate clearly. I forwarded all of it to my lawyer the next morning. She said, "This is actually helpful. It establishes ongoing intent to access the property." Over the following 2 weeks, I started quietly pulling together every financial thread I could find that connected my brother to the cottage. I'm not a forensic accountant, but I work in regulatory compliance. and I know how to follow a paper trail. I found that my brother had, in January of that year, 2 months before the fraudulent transfer was filed, taken out a home equity line of credit on his Mississauga property. I found this through a mutual contact who works in lending, who mentioned it in passing without knowing the full context of what I was dealing with. The timing was notable but not conclusive. What was more conclusive was what I found when I went back through the records from the estate administration. My grandmother's estate lawyer had sent me copies of all the probate documents. I'd stored everything digitally and backed it up in 3 places. When I went through it again carefully, I noticed something I'd missed the first time. There was a letter, filed as part of the estate correspondence, that purported to be from me, requesting that the transfer of title include my brother as a co-owner for family harmony purposes. The letter was dated 2 weeks after the actual probate was finalized. It used my name, my address, but the phrasing was slightly off in a way that's hard to explain. The letter read like someone who had studied how I write but didn't quite get it right. And the signature was wrong. I've signed my name the same way since I was 19. This was close but not identical. I sent the letter to my lawyer. She had it examined by a document analyst. The conclusion was that the signature was not consistent with my authenticated signature samples. By this point, we had a fraudulent land transfer document with a forged signature, a fabricated letter filed with the estate, and camera footage of my brother attempting to access the property without authorization. My lawyer submitted everything to the OPP Financial Crimes Unit. She also filed a civil action to have the fraudulent transfer set aside and to seek damages. My mother called 3 more times during this period. The first 2 calls I let go to voicemail. The messages were variations on the same theme. The cottage had always been a family property. I was being selfish. My brother was going through a hard time. Couldn't we just work something out? The third call I answered. She told me my brother was devastated that I was doing this to him. I asked her if she understood that someone had forged my signature on a legal document. She said she didn't know anything about that. I asked her if she'd read the letter that was filed with the estate, the one purportedly from me. Another pause. Then she said she thought I must have sent it and forgotten about it. I ended the call. I want to say something about this part because I think it's the thing people don't always talk about in situations like this. The fraud itself, the forged signature, the manipulated document that was shocking, but in the way it was also clarifying. It was a clear wrong. It had a clear remedy. What was harder in some ways was the response from my mother, not because she was aggressively defending my brother, but because she seemed to genuinely prefer not to know. She had arranged her understanding of the situation in a way that let her avoid looking directly at what her son had done, and she wanted me to arrange my understanding the same way. That's a particular kind of loneliness, when someone you love chooses not to see something because seeing it would cost them something. I'm not telling you I handled it perfectly. There were nights where I sat at my kitchen table in Hamilton and cried. There were nights where I almost picked up the phone and said, "Fine, he can have a share, I just want my family back." I didn't. But the impulse was real. What helped me was going back, when things felt uncertain, to the documents, the will, the original transfer, the photos, the receipts, the time-stamped camera footage. There's something steadying about evidence when everything else is shifting. It doesn't lie to you. It doesn't need anything from you. It just is what it is. The OPP laid charges in late June. My brother was charged with fraud over $5,000 and forgery under the criminal code. He was served at his house in Mississauga on a Wednesday morning. My lawyer called me to let me know. I was at work. I went to the bathroom, stood there for about 2 minutes, and then went back to my desk. My mother called that afternoon. She was not using her calm voice. She said I had destroyed the family. She said my grandmother would be ashamed of me. She said my brother had a wife and children and I had done this to all of them. I let her finish. Then I said he forged my signature on a property document to steal an asset my grandmother left me. I didn't do this to him. He did this to him. He did this to himself. I told her I loved her. I told her I wasn't going to discuss it further, and I hung up. That was the last conversation we've had so far. It's been 4 months. The criminal case is moving through the Ontario court system. My lawyer says these things take time, likely another year before it resolves, possibly longer. The civil action to have the fraudulent transfer formally set aside has already been decided in my favor. The title to the cottage is solely in my name again. That happened in August. I drove up to the cottage the weekend after the title was corrected. It was a warm Saturday in late August, the kind of day my grandmother used to call borrowed time before fall. I opened all the windows. I sat on the dock and watched a loon working its way across the bay. I had a coffee, and I didn't think about any of it for about an hour. That hour felt like the first clean breath I'd taken since March. The cottage needs some work before winter. There's a section of the dock that has to be replaced, and I want to get someone to look at the chimney. I've already made the calls. I'll be up there in October to get it closed properly for the season. My grandmother bought that property with money she saved over 15 years, working as a lab technician at a hospital in Peterborough. She raised 2 kids, paid off her house, and then saved enough to buy a piece of lakefront that she loved for the rest of her life. She left it to me because she trusted me to take care of it. I intend to,